Welcome to Mental Health and You. This podcast brings you the best information and advice from across the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. Every fortnight, we will hear from one of our specialist areas, be it school and parent support, the Recovery College, wellbeing, or research.
Welcome to the Psychology in Schools podcast. Today, I, Beth Mosley, consultant clinical psychologist, and here with Kelsey, who is another psychologist in the Psychology in Schools team. Hi, Kelsey.
Hi.
And we've got our guest here today, Kelly, who's a parent of two children aged 11 and 14. Hi, Kelly.
Hello.
And we're here today to talk about a really difficult topic, the war in Ukraine, and how do we talk to our children about this heartbreaking, devastating event, which is affecting all of us in lots of different ways. So I'd like to start, first of all, with asking you a question, Kelly. What's your experience so far as a parent of talking to your children about the war?
Well, that's a really good question, actually. So we were talking quite openly about the potential invasion before it happened, but in a very positive way, saying, "Oh, we don't think it will." It's a bit of a bluff. And so our next door neighbour, Ivana, is from Ukraine, so we kind of had this direct link with it all from the start by talking to her. And even she was sort of saying in front of the kids, like joking, saying, "Oh, I don't think it's going to happen. It'll de-escalate, and my parents are going to stay there, and they're going to fight with their pots and pans and hands." And it was just a bit jokey. And then on that Thursday, when it happened, I think I woke up in total shock. And I think I, as a parent, upon reflection, didn't handle that very well, because I was very dramatic about it and flapping around, worrying about Ivana next door. And of course, it very quickly escalated into the nuclear chat, didn't it? And again, I didn't really handle that very well, because my children, I wasn't really kind of paying too much attention to how it was affecting them mentally. And then there was a BBC alert saying Putin's mentioned the nuclear button. And I kind of read it out in a dramatic way, like, "Oh my goodness, have you read this?" And then my 11-year-old got really frightened and said, "Nuclear war, oh my goodness, are we all going to die?" And it was then that I realized that, oh my goodness, they're listening to all of this, and you've got to be really careful. And then I completely changed my approach to it, and then stopped dramatizing and just trying to bring it down a level, and then talking him down and talking about how it was actually very unlikely, and talked about then we started talking about NATO in depth that we'd never done before. I was quite surprised at how much he knew about NATO, actually, from his history at school, and they do talk about politics a bit. But so I didn't start it off well, and I'm kind of going back now, sort of kind of digging myself out of a hole by now. Just providing more reassurance. My daughter has her own smartphone with the BBC News app. So when I pick her up from the train station each evening, and we do chat every evening about what has been going on that day. But she seems quite level-headed about it, and doesn't seem to have the anxiety that my younger does. She just seems to be a bit more grounded and has more of an understanding of what's going on sort of politically, I suppose. I don't know how does that compare to how yours have reacted?
Well, like you, I've got a spread of age 9, 12 and 17. And you've mentioned a few things there which I think will resonate with me certainly, and with a lot of our listeners. This experience as a parent, when you're finding stuff out that's shocking you and scaring you and making you feel quite strong emotions, at essentially the same time as your children. And it does remind me of the pandemic, that experience of our world essentially being turned upside down, and us not having any advance warning ahead of our children, really. So we were kind of going through the emotional experience with our children, in front of our children, and it's really difficult, isn't it, to manage those feelings and know how honest and open to be with our children about what's going on, and how much to kind of cover up and pretend everything's okay. And it sounds like you've worked really hard to get that balance right, and I think that's really important. And I'm sure lots of people will be wondering, how do I manage that? Because just like you, my daughter was struggling at the very beginning, before the war started, with the anxiety of the war starting, and again, being an adolescent, she was very preoccupied with how it would directly affect her and her closest people around her. My 9-year-old was really quite oblivious. But interestingly, once the war broke out, she was anxious again, and she was looking to me for that reassurance, for definite. But what I found really interesting was that she just suddenly stopped worrying about it. And I asked her the other day why, and she said, well, I kept going into school and saying to my friends, oh, we're all going to die and it's terrible and it's awful. And then my friends just said, oh, shut up, Eva. We're not going to die. We're fine. So stop being so melodramatic and get on with it. And she said, then I just stopped being, and then I thought, okay, you're right. And I thought, isn't it interesting how well, we know this is about adolescent development, really, is that children do listen to their peer group more than they listen to us a lot of the time. So I guess having those times to talk to our children about what's going on in their peer group, as well as what they're seeing on the news and picking up independently on their phones, is really important, because you're really relying on your children being part of a friendship group who are managing the anxiety about what's happening well, or managing the trauma, really, because I do think some of the images that we're seeing are very traumatic, and it's hard not to start kind of tears coming to your eyes, feeling overwhelmed with crying as soon as you do turn the TV on, and your children, of course, are witnessing that. And I think, like you said, with our older children, they're able to kind of take a larger world view, and kind of think about this in the context of history, and what this means about humanity. And then again, I think, how do I manage this? I'm constantly thinking about it. How do I manage it in front of my 17-year-old? When I looked at the news and was starting to cry, but I was just hearing the distress in people's voice and seeing those images, I thought, I need him to understand that this is wrong and terrible and unjust, and it fills me with anger as well as deep sadness. But I need it to be emotions that are manageable rather than unmanageable. Does that make sense? So I'm feeling really strong emotions right here, as I should, because that's completely appropriate. To not feel anything would, for me in my life, would feel strange in a way. But it's giving the message that despite feeling such strong emotions, I'm not falling apart. I'm actually kind of adding a dialogue that makes sense. So you're kind of, if you're displaying those emotions of distress, it's kind of adding that narrative of why. I'm so deeply sad that this is happening to people, and it's so unfair and it's so unjust, and that makes me feel so angry and helpless that I can't do anything about it. And I think what we're doing then as parents is we're kind of modeling to our children, the life is very difficult and unfair in some situations, and that will make us feel very strong emotions, and that makes sense. And that's okay, and it's how we kind of deal with that's the important thing. Does that kind of add up? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And one thing I have noticed, actually, since it's happened, we well, two things have happened. First of all, the week after the invasion, my son sadly broke his ankle in football, so he's kind of been much more off his gadgets and with us as a family, because he can't get anywhere in the house. But because we've been talking quite openly every day about what's been going on in Ukraine, I think as children, they've both become a bit more aware of how fortunate they are at the moment, at this point in time in their lives, that actually life's okay. And if I go back to 2 weeks before it all started, I don't know, there were little things going on at home, like bickering and arguments about things that really didn't matter. And I think it's making them really reflect upon, how fortunate they are, and how, like you say, helpless they are to help these children in Ukraine. I do think both their schools have been doing some fantastic sort of fundraising and activities and things to sort of raise money and resources for Ukraine. And I think doing something practical did help them both kind of manage their emotions as well.
That's a really important point, isn't it? And it's so lovely to hear that, because I think so many schools in the community have really pulled together, haven't they? And I guess what we know about those big feelings that we've all been talking about, feelings like anxiety and anger, actually they're telling us something really important. And often what we know is really helpful, as you've said there, Kelly, is helping our children turn those things into actions, those feelings into actions, and doing those small things at school, whether it's a bit of fundraising or wearing non-school uniform in aid of Ukraine, is really, really helpful. And it reminds us and our children that we can all do things to feel better, and to remind ourselves, I guess, of the importance of staying connected and reminding ourselves of hopeful stories, and the things that us as humans can do for each other when it's such a difficult time that we're going through.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
I think this it's quite interesting, because I think I got very upset on the Saturday. So when it's like second or third day of the invasion, I went to visit our Ukrainian neighbor, and I wasn't aware of where her parents lived, and they were living in Kiev. And I kind of, for the first time in my life, I was talking directly to a person who was directly involved in a war. And I'd never thought about that at all. And I came back home, and I had a bit of a cry in front of the family. And I said, that was the most harrowing conversation I've ever had with anyone in my life. These poor people are like, they've dragged their bed to like the nearest stable wall, the most stable wall in their house, and they've got all their belongings by the door ready to go. And it was just, I don't know, talking to someone whose family are there going through that, it made it just so real. And it's so often when you watch things on the news, it's always, you're very far removed, isn't it? And I'm not, I watch the news all the time, but this is the first time I've felt really truly affected by a war that is happening. And I think that's been the same with everyone I'm talking to. It feels very different this time.
And I just think that going back to the idea of how do we talk to children of different ages around this is probably something parents, especially parents if you've got a mixture of ages in your household, because it's hard to not be part of conversations if you're a young'un and you've got older children. So how do you manage that? Talking to older children a bit more explicitly about it, and they're going to be sharing the information they know about it. And we know teenage brains are basically wired to find out things for themselves. They don't like to be told stuff. So I guess that's where we can support them to make sure they're getting their information from accurate sources, and then we can provide that time to talk it through. And just really practically, what I've been trying to do is use later in the night when my youngest is in bed to have that time to talk it through, or in a car journey with my daughter when I haven't got the youngest in the car, so that you're kind of providing this sorting space. Again, I've got to be in the right frame of mind. If I'm busy and rushing out the door, or I'm really stressed, then I'm not going to be able to kind of have the helpful conversation, or just be a space where those conversations can happen. And I guess with my younger child, what I've noticed is that I've suppose the way I've talked to him about it is much more simple and concrete. And if he was a bit younger, I'd probably be going back to even more basic. If someone takes something away that doesn't belong to them, it's not okay, and that's what's happening in this situation. But he's not being particularly openly interested at all. But what I have noticed is his behaviour's changed a bit, and it's not been as good. He's been quite he's been more easily upset, more easily irritable. And so what I'm essentially trying to do is not force him to talk about what's going on, but instead just provide a bit more time with him in the evenings. I think a big challenge we have as parents is our children can be very happily independently on their screens. So they can just, I've got 3 kids, and sometimes I would think I'm in the house and on my own, because they're all in their bedrooms just on their whatever it is, they're playing Minecraft, or my daughter's just doing her phone with her friends, and my son's doing on his PC. So, and I think sometimes as a parent, when you're stressed and you're struggling, your availability tends to go down. And that's just at the point when your children actually need you more. And what I've noticed is that, in those moments, I'm just so grateful that my kids are all just quietly busy doing something and they're not arguing. Because quite often when we all come together at meal times, that's when you just kind of think, oh, it's just there's always someone arguing. That's when the stress of family life comes out, this time which everyone else seems to be having a lovely dinner together. For my family, often tends to end up in big eruptions. So I guess what I've had to really consciously do, even though it's been quite hard for me, because I felt exhausted from work and felt really emotional about what's happening in the world and unsettled about all the economic changes that are happening, which will have a direct impact on families, and myself as well included. I've had to make the effort to go to my 9-year-old and spend a bit more time with him. And actually what I did was I went and got all of the board games. I know we all did this down in lockdown, didn't we? Well, lots of people did. I didn't, but lots of people did. And I got one of these like simple word games out, and I just said to him, should we play this tonight? And honestly, I thought he was just going to go, don't be so ridiculous, Mum. But actually, we got playing it, and he was just loving. And so I didn't require masses of effort from me because I was exhausted. But we were just together doing this kind of game, which wasn't going to be too difficult, so he wasn't easily going to get in a mood. And in that hour that I ended up spending with him before bed, I just saw a complete change in his body language. And then we finished up, and it was like, can we do this again tomorrow night? And I thought, this game is actually really boring. Like it's making letters, it's like making words out of Scrabble blocks. I was thinking, how does this compare to Fortnite? But he was like, can we play this again tomorrow night? I was like, yeah, definitely. And I thought, actually, how easy was that? And then I kind of went to bed as a parent feeling like, oh, I've had that quality time with him. And I just saw that little change in him, that he relaxed and he just enjoyed being in my presence, which I think sometimes we forget how our children just love our attention or our presence so much. So I guess that's what my message to parents would be is, really clock your own stress levels and your own sense of not being so available to your children, and try to consciously, make a decision to simply change that. You don't have to do anything other than sit next to your child and watch something that they're interested in with them and just be next to them, and often that's enough. And I think that can really make a big difference, because there's such a degree of comfort in our presence, really, and being relaxed around our children.
Yeah, that's so true. And interesting that I've been, since it's started, my son and I have these blocks of time where it's just me and one of the children. So my daughter leaves for school at 7 o'clock, so I normally drop her at school, but then my son and I have this special time where it's just us, and we've been choosing to spend, so that time of the morning we've been talking about what happened the day before. And he's got a fantastic history teacher at school that he just clicks with. So if we come across anything that I don't know the answer to, because I don't often, actually, if I'm totally honest, my history knowledge of various wars and things is probably not as good as my son's. So I find that's a really good time to talk to him about it, because then I know he can go to school and he can then quiz his teacher, who I call the walking Wikipedia, and ask him for any reassurances. But then my daughter, when we get home, we then have time in the car together, and we tend to sort of sit and have, since the war has started, she's actually been asking me just to sit with her by herself in the kitchen to have dinner, as opposed to being in the dining room. So it's really like boys and girls divide in the evening. But we have then just not always sat and talked about it, but just had some quality time together. And since doing that, putting that time aside with each of them, their behaviour, I do think, now you've said that, might have slightly improved.
Mm.
And I think that's really lovely, Kelly. And I think I was just reflecting on, as you were talking, the different things that you're doing there for your children and how important each of those things are. And just to reflect again, when you sort of said, when I don't have the answers myself, because often, we don't always have all of the answers, do we? Especially with this ever-changing situation that we're sort of all going through. And I think I'd really like the way you just sort of said you're just really honest with your child and just saying, I don't know, and let's go and find out. I think that's so important, isn't it? And a message to all of our listeners really is, just to be honest and open, to not lie, and to find out together, or use a teacher or other people who might have more of that understanding. And I guess the other thing that you said that I was sort of reflecting on is spending different times with different children, depending on when they might be calmer, when they like to connect, and actually finding that time to talk when it works for you, but also them, that time when things are calmer, they know it's coming, you know it's coming, is so important with these things. And then just that connection together is so important, isn't it? In these times where we're all dealing with such high emotions and different emotions. And as sort of Beth was saying as well, that sort of any moment, whether it be sitting in the kitchen or playing a small game, it's just those moments when they are distracted from what's going on and they're just having those calm and those calm and happy moments with us. So important.
And I think that
Sorry.
go on, Kelly, it's okay.
I'm just going to say, I, as a parent for years, believed that to be the best parent, we had to all be together as a family unit, all in the same room, all doing the same thing. And it wasn't until last summer that we had this disastrous family camping holiday. It was just the worst holiday in the world. We all cried. We all hated each other. It was dreadful. And we then got home, and I then booked another holiday just for me and my daughter, just to go away just for 2 nights together. And I realised all of a sudden, oh my goodness, my kids need me differently, and it's okay to have time with just one, because it's really I've been doing that ever since. I have like days with one of them, and I had to have separate days where I do, because they have they have different emotional needs, and life has got better since I've been doing that.
And you're absolutely right, isn't it? It's about age, gender, temperament, and knowing your children and thinking about what do each of them as individuals need, at all times, but particularly right now when we're thinking about these sorts of issues.
And I think that makes me reflect on adolescence being a time where it's hard, isn't it, to split ourselves in so many pieces as a parent, especially if we might be parenting on our own. And that's where I really rely on, because I am a single parent. Well, I'm single in that I don't live with the children's father, but he is very involved in their life, so I'm massively grateful for that, and we're on the same page with, I guess, on so many levels, which is really valuable. So I always feel it's a bit unfair to say I'm a single parent, because I don't live with their dad, but he's very involved with their lives. But I guess what it means is that in the week I'm on my own with my children. I don't have another adult in the household to do the kind of pairing, or I can be with one child and the other adult can be with the other children. So what I found really helpful is thinking about the friends and family members in my life who can support me and my children's network with providing those other opportunities for connection and learning and feeling valued as an individual. So I'm lucky I've got siblings, and they have children too. And I think it's your children having access to a range of trusted adults, so that it sometimes in your own life, especially if you're struggling, it can feel like an enormous amount of pressure for you as the parent to get it right. And I just think when we think about how, historically we would have brought adolescents up in communities, they wouldn't be relying on one single or couple of adults. They'd have been relying on a community of adults to bring them up. And so I think sometimes, we can get stuck in that place of feeling like it's all on us, and if we're struggling, that can feel completely overwhelming. And I just think it's important to remind people that, bringing in and involving other important, reliable people in your own life to enable your children to build relationships with those, whether it's grandparents, a really close friend, or people who you can trust, obviously, can actually provide those opportunities, particularly for adolescents, because adolescents are trying to develop relationships outside of yourself. So I think that's just a helpful kind of reminder, really, to not feel like you failed if you're not the one who's able to do all of this, because sometimes we have different events happening in our life that make it much harder for us to be that one person. So the key, I guess, is noticing that and recognizing it, and then kind of asking for help. And again, help. How have the people of Ukraine, survived what's been happening? It's through help from others, care and compassion. And it's really hard, that juxtaposition between people are creating the torment and the torture and the brutality and acting in such horrible ways that you can't get your head around it, and other people are opening their homes, they're sacrificing their lives, they are doing things which are so brave and courageous. And I think it's we often get fixed on the stories of the bad stuff that's happening, certainly when we're looking at the news, but it's really about ensuring that we give enough privilege to the stories of kindness and compassion and hope, whether that's something that's happening in the Ukraine or in Poland right now, or if that's something that's happening within your own community. Because I think, especially if you have a young person who might be kind of predisposed towards low mood, it can, and even for us ourselves, it can give us a real sense of hopelessness about life, about, well, what is the point of everything if this is the way people are going to behave? And I think just those stories of hope, and small acts can mean so much. I just remember somebody saying, when they came over the border from Ukraine after queuing for hours, somebody gave them some chocolate and a warm drink, and received them warmly and with compassion. And that act in itself was just totally just a life-changing moment for that person who was so desperate. So it's also important to remember that it's small things. It doesn't have to be a massive grand gesture. It's those small acts of kindness, and that feels more doable, I think, for us and for our children as well.
It's interesting what you just said there about talking to the children about the positive things that are coming out of it. And when you look at the news very rarely focuses on positives. It's always the worst case scenario things going on, isn't it? And I think as humans, we're kind of drawn to that stuff, aren't we? We have this sick nature. We want to read about the bad stuff, don't we? Kind of, obviously you guys are experts in why we do that, but you don't really pick up the BBC News app and read about all the lovely things that people are doing. And you've made me really think that's what I need to be focusing more on that. That's a really, really good point.
You're completely right. I mean, this is a real challenge, isn't it, for all of us, I imagine, at the moment, is a sort of a sense of addiction to listening into the news. And as human beings, we are basically designed to survive. We're not designed to be happy. We're designed to survive. All of our biological system is up for survival. So naturally, when we know there's a potential threat and there's something to be anxious about, we want to get the information so that we can make some decisions which will make it more likely that we'll survive. So it is a very natural way our brains work. We have a negativity bias in order to protect us. And we also know that if we're looking at our screens, our brains are programmed so we'll stare at things that make us angry. So feeling angry and upset, we're more likely to keep scrolling. So if it's enraging, it's engaging, essentially. And I guess that's why it's so important for us to kind of recognize that's what's happening, and keep things in perspective, because of course we could all be affected by this war if Putin makes a catastrophic decision around a nuclear kind of attempt. Of course we are genuinely probably all in the most jeopardy we've been in, I would say, and in my lifetime as a nation, because I've been living in relative safety, certainly compared to many other countries in the world who've been dealing with war throughout the last few decades, and it hasn't been so on our agenda as this war has. So I guess we have to keep it in perspective and ensure that we don't become so consumed and addicted to tracking what's happening that it actually becomes really unhelpful for us. And in fact, instead of helping us survive, which is what we're programmed to pay attention to these things to do, what it actually means is we're moving into kind of not engaging with our life as fully. We're actually not thriving. We're not able to be as helpful to our family and to ourselves. We're not able to look after ourselves. So there is something about employing that self-discipline to give ourselves a little bit of time with the news maybe, and then turn it off, knowing our brains are programmed to just keep wanting to watch. And actually my daughter started she comes in the kitchen, and sometimes I'm feeling like doing the washing up, I'll put the news on, which I would never normally do, but I certainly did it during COVID. I'll put the news on to see what's happening, and then my daughter just comes in the kitchen, turns it off. And actually I kind of feel a bit grateful to her, because I can feel that need in me, but that need in me isn't necessarily helping me kind of look after myself. And ultimately, if I'm stopping doing the other activities that mean I keep my well-being good, if I'm not taking the dog for a walk, or I'm not connecting with my children because I'm so preoccupied with what's going on, or not having a conversation with my friend or someone else, then I'm actually kind of, this is really affecting me and it's not helping me survive. It's actually doing the opposite thing. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I was getting into the habit of, I'm still quite bad at this actually. I was saying this probably kind of started recording. I have been waking up every morning throughout the whole last 3 weeks, and my alarm goes off, which is on my phone. And then I'm immediately looking at any updates on BBC News. I'm starting my day like that. And then I've always been a bit of a happy radio station person. So I've always needed a bit of Chris Evans in my life in the morning. So in my 7 to 7:30 car journey, I've always got Chris Evans on. But I've been having BBC like World Service instead. So I've been setting up my day in a really negative way. And then I was then coming home, and in between client Zooms, having just on in the background BBC News. And obviously, like you say, it's so addictive. And, from in that 6-hour period that was on in the background at home, there was nothing really changing. I was listening to the same report, just being repeated in a different way. And I became completely addicted. When my son actually broke his leg, it was quite, well, it wasn't good for him, obviously. He's not very happy. But it almost like broke the chain of me being so hooked on watching the news, because I didn't want to have him watching the news all day. So I do think that I have become more productive and helpful and happier, and therefore a better mum over the last couple of weeks for not having the TV on all day.
And I guess I'm thinking of the people, anyone who's experiencing their life as being torn apart and the trauma of that right now, imagining what would it feel like to listen to us right now? Because we're in such we're so blessed, aren't we? And we can turn the TV off and do something and not be completely preoccupied by it. And I guess if we're feeling masses of guilt about that, which I am feeling so grateful for the privileges I have in my life and the freedom I have and the fear I don't have to live with, that, like you said earlier, like just a realization of that gratitude, and at the same time with that gratitude, I'm also feeling guilt around how privileged I am, and that I'm so grateful I am not in that position in my life. But I guess what I learned on a couple of weekends ago was, I'm not going to use this guilt energy and this energy of kind of just being obsessed with watching the news for a long time and trying to take in as much information. I'm going to try and use this energy to do something helpful for other people. And I'm really lucky because in my job I can do that. So I thought, right, I'm going to write an article about, that weekend I thought I'm going to write an article about how to talk to your children about the Ukraine war. And I'm going to think about what our team can do, record a podcast, run a parent workshop. And I'm now going to think about what are our services doing to support refugees that come into this country? So luckily in my job, I can turn all of that energy into something that is more helpful, and then immediately it helps me feel like I'm turning my feelings into some kind of helpful actions. And I guess everybody can do that in one way or another if they're having that same struggle, because then immediately that act of feeling like you're making a valuable contribution um, makes you feel better. It's kind of as soon as I thought I'm going to write this article, I had a sense of massive relief because I'm doing something. I don't feel so helpless. I don't feel so out of control. So I don't know if for both you and Kelsey have had a similar experience of turning your those sorts of feelings into something helpful.
Yeah, I think on World Women's Day, because I'm hugely into women's physiology and health with my job, it sounds such a simple thing, but I used the link that the World Women's Day main site had, which was for sort of helping the ladies and the girls in Ukraine sort of in future years. I sort of posted that, and it was tiny thing, but it did lift me a bit and it made me feel less, like you say, I feel so guilty. We're so fortunate. And I've had to keep giving myself like reality checks, and when I've been getting really sort of down about Ukraine, I've had to keep telling myself, but Kelly, you're you're not the one who's going through this. Yeah, you got to do something positive with it. I still keep thinking I keep thinking about doing a sporting event, because I work in sport, so I'm thinking, what can I do that's productive, that's going to help people? I need to have a grand plan for this, because this is going to be an ongoing crisis. Because at the moment there's so much, isn't there, right now, that's kind of going their way. This needs to be some like long-standing, sustainable actions to support them over the coming years.
Absolutely, and I think, based on what you guys are saying, I can completely relate to that. I think for a long time I felt really, I think guilt was my biggest emotion, actually, just feeling, that I'm so lucky and privileged. And actually my dad in the local community has been doing a lot of fundraising, and actually that's what helped me, really, that I could get involved with that, but also it just restored my faith in humanity and those small acts of kindness that we've been reflecting on, and also just seeing photos of what schools are doing and local children. I saw this morning that lots of children have just been writing letters of hope and love and kindness to other children in Ukraine, and that really was heartwarming. And I think, thinking about what we can do, but also, supporting our children with those big feelings and helping them to turn those into helpful actions, small things, that they can do to help feeling like they're making a difference, I think is so important, isn't it? Because we know that helps us, so it's going to help our children as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Our children have asked, well, my husband and I did speak about it a few weeks ago, sort of tentatively, about sort of having, hosting a refugee family here. So we've probably got enough room, and the children, we didn't say anything to the children, and they both independently said, could we host a refugee family? And we said, oh, we have actually been thinking about that. So do you know what, I don't know, it's really made my husband and I reflect about our family and what we've got and our family values, thinking about bringing in another family. It just feels the right thing to do. So luckily our neighbour over the way, her parents have got out of Ukraine, and they're just waiting for the green light to come and live next door. And I'm really looking forward to meeting them. But it's going to be really nice for my children to meet them, and to, I don't know, it's going to be a great moment for them to see some hope, some positivity. For these people they're safe, and they're with family, and it was worked out well for them. But the space though.
And I guess those stories are so important as well, aren't they? You know, like we've been talking about, we're drawn to those, you know, those really awful things that are happening right now. And it's about trying to get that balance, that, you know, the importance of you know, being mindful of how much time we're looking at those things and how much our children are as well, but then also balancing that with these more positive stories, those acts of kindness, is really, really important, isn't it, to, you know, for us and our children.
I think one of the really interesting things, though, for me, that I've been listening to my children talking about, and that is how they've never really hugely been engaged in politics because they're quite young, and you know, they're probably joked around about politicians they've seen on television and things, but they've been so impressed with Zelensky. I mean, we all have. And it's really,
we're all in love with him.
he's amazing. And it's been really interesting hearing them compare him as a man, as a role model. I'm not going to go into politics now, but compare him to some of the people we've got in our country, high in politics. And yeah, they're without us getting involved in that discussion, it's made them really think about, you know, what kind of people should be ruling the world. So I had a chat with the kids last weekend, and because I was listening to them talking about it, and I said, in all kind of roles in life, there's like red tape, and there's bureaucracy, and there's levels and standards you have to attain to be these senior roles. But in politics, that kind of goes to the wayside a bit, doesn't it? And too much, it's often about, you know, it's about the wrong things. And I think they've really engaged with this guy and just thought, wow, this is we could all do with someone like him.
Absolutely. I think he's an inspiration, and you know, if anyone's interested in leadership, I mean, he is the walking, living, breathing representation of a good leader, isn't he? And I think there are opportunities here for our children to learn so much, you know, about the realities of life, but also about what it takes, you know, to look after others, to fight for injustice, to, you know, be a good leader. And so hopefully there will be stories which will be inspiring and will lead our young people to being more balanced in their views, and also be less focused on their immediate kind of world, and for our older children have a broader worldview. Although I do have to work hard to not say to my daughter when she's complaining about some completely normal teenage problem, like me dropping her in one place rather than another, so she has to walk for 5 minutes, I have to bite my lip to say, there are children who walk for miles with no food and no water. How can you be so selfish? I've had to work so hard to not use some of these stories to kind of, you know, shame my child for being a typical adolescent. And I guess it's easy to fall into that trap, isn't it? So thank you so much for our discussions today. I guess, you know, what we've all articulated is, in so many ways, the task of being a parent right now is very simple, although it's really hard. It's about having calm, open, practical discussions whilst keeping up our family's usual routines, and actually maybe improving our availability. So we might actually make ourselves more available in some small ways. And that is going to be the most effective way to make our children feel safe during this tricky time. So thank you, Kelly, and thank you very much to Kelsey for joining us for this discussion today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please do subscribe. It's free and means the podcast will automatically download every fortnight. Do rate and review our podcast and follow our social media accounts. They're all in the show notes. And more than anything, look after yourself.